Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. Vim PF here, and we've got another great episode of Dram Slam today. Before we get into the guest and bringing them on, I just want to take a couple of moments to tell you about the new podcast I'm going to be doing of this. Of course, it's going to be available on YouTube, but I'm going to be splitting this down as well into podcasts. So if you prefer that sort of platform, or if you're already listening on podcasts, make sure you like it and follow it on your various different platforms. Of course, if you still want to watch YouTube, that's great because we love to have you on the video as well. Let's get on with it then. Let's bring our guest in for today. Today we've got an excellent guest, Billy Abbott, who is a whiskey writer, a blogger. He's a trainer. He's like a author now. So if you might know him from any one of those things, but he's basically absolutely everywhere. Welcome, Billy. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right, thanks, man. Yeah, everywhere. That seems to be my current MO, which is very tiring. It's very tiring.
Yeah, I can imagine. I obviously the book is just out now, but I mean, it must have been a bit of a horrendous thing to get that done and get it out into the open air. So I bet you're glad that's relatively over.
Hey, it's been a very strange year, a very strange couple of years, as we all know, and having this weird opportunity pop up in the middle of writing a book, but the joys of printing a book in Malta, having it shipped to the UK, and it's not even me. I do none of this. I literally just sit around and let the British Library organise all that sort of thing.
Excellent, excellent. We'll be going into the book a little bit later on. Today we've got 6 great drams on the table. How are you feeling about some of these whiskies so far?
Intrigued. A few things I know, a few things I do not know. We shall see.
Excellent. I mean that fills me with joy that I can bring someone like yourself who's been in the whiskey industry for so long, something new. But that's the benefit of whiskey right now, isn't it? It's an excellent landscape.
Yeah, there's so much new going on. I just think around the rest of my desk. I've been doing a little bit of organising earlier on. And I've just got this massive stack of new bits and pieces. And I've recently written down because I've been out of the game a little bit, been so busy at work and sorting this book stuff out, I haven't been getting down to just writing tasting notes and tasting things. And I wrote a set of Post-it notes out, sort of saying, here's the stuff I need to taste now. And then I now have, oh no, here's some more urgent ones I need to stick on the front, back onto my Post-it note wall. It's just so much new stuff coming out all the time, and it's difficult to keep on top of it. But we try. It's a harsh life we lead, that we need to try and keep an eye on all these things.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, your organisational system looks an awful lot like mine. I mean, I tend to just keep my whiskies in a kind of review queue down here. And some of them, which get usurped by new stuff that's coming out all the time, have been here for months and months and months, bless them, to the point where they're not even out anymore. And it kind of is irrelevant when I cover it then, isn't it? Because if you can't even get it anymore, then I'll just cover it later. It's fine.
It gets even more embarrassing if, let's just say, you work for a major whiskey retailer. I couldn't possibly say who you're talking about, who I'm talking about even, and you release, let's just say, last week, 9 single cask whiskies, and you're in the middle of a massive bout of flu. They turn up, you get your samples, you can't do tasting notes in time, and a bunch of them sell out before you get the chance to publish the tasting notes. So much new stuff, and we are but human, unfortunately, and so. Yes, my voice is no longer quite so sexy as it once was, at least. So you have a little bit of gravel in the background for you today, but no more than that.
Well, let's get into the first whiskey then. It's a Jura 18, which I've been sort of saying is a really good way to start a flight. And while we're sort of nosing this and pouring over it a little bit, I'll ask you your first question, which is a little bit of an expansive one, so answer it how you like. And I ask everybody with this whiskey what your whiskey origin story is. This is before you had a kind of professional interest in it, let's say. What got you into whiskey? Was there any particular stories or whiskies that really made you think, yes, this is where I want to go?
It's a bit of a weird one because I have like a 2-step thing into the whiskey world. And the first step is slightly earlier than most people because it's when I was about 5. Because my family, my grandmother had a timeshare up in Scotland, in Aviemore, up on edge of the Cairngorms, lovely place. A little bit more rundown these days than it was in 1983, wherever it was. So we went up, we took my grandmother's timeshare for a year, so 82, 83, something like that. My little brother is 3 years younger than me, so he's like, 1 or 2, tiny child. And so we went up to Scotland running around, and my dad likes whiskey, so he said, let's go to a distillery. So we went to Glenfarclas, and we wandered around. And it was really cool. And we went back the next year because my mum and dad got caught by the timeshare salesman and they sold them a timeshare. So we went back again and we did the distillery tour at Glenfarclas again because my dad quite liked Glenfarclas. And then the next year we went back and we turned up and my dad just went to the tasting room. Me and my little brother conducted the tour around Glenfarclas. And and I just remember I still have my Glenfarclas tie which I was bought at like the age of 6 or 7, this tiny child's Glenfarclas tie hiding in the other room. And I just remember really liking whiskey distilleries, but my parents used to go to a lot of wine tastings, and I tag along, and always the last thing in the wine tasting would be some brandy. And so it's glass of brandy to small child, and small child go, and I couldn't bring it closer than about 6 inches away from my face because the smell of alcohol was almost like a wall, and I just couldn't do it. When I grew up and I went to university, and in this time really wasn't interested in spirits. I was a beer guy. I grew up in a brewery town, and my dad's a big beer and wine fan, so did lots of beer and wine things. Got to university, started drinking lots of rum and coke because, as one does. And occasionally I switched to Jameson and coke if I was feeling a little bit frisky. Still drinking beer. I used to work in the bar, and one night after work, the bar manager, who was the union president at the time, sat us all down and said, right, to be real people in this world, you need to drink whiskey. And it's like, oh God, Eric, okay, if you say so. Wait a minute. Are you going to give us a load of free whiskey? Yes, we agree. And so he basically did an impromptu whiskey tasting. And us being students went, sweet, we'll have that. A bit of free whiskey. Not going to say no about that. And so, we drank our way through them. I'm just sitting there just necking them talking. And Eric just talked rubbish about whiskey because he knew nothing at all, really. He's like, 22-year-old at university trying to show off to a bunch of, 19, 20-year-olds. And we got to Talisker 10. We went through, it was the Diageo Classic Malts. It was just the little sort of like pile on the back of a standard bar. Cragganmore and Glenkinchie and Oban. And got to Talisker, and I went, oh, this is interesting. I quite like this. This is not what I expected. I tried some Lagavulin the year beforehand for a friend of mine that just had like his 21st birthday or something, and he had a really expensive bottle of Lagavulin. I think maybe sort of like £100 bottle as it would be these days, sort of thing, but massively expensive in the eyes of students drinking our £12 a bottle dodgy vodka as we were at the time. I remember drinking that, going, that's interesting. But sitting there again, Talisker 10, I went, that's great. And Lagavulin 16 came out, and I went, I really like that. That's incredible. And that was sort of just before the sort of Christmas break, and I wasn't going home for Christmas for a variety of reasons. I can't remember why now, but I was staying in London on my own over Christmas. And so I spent all the money I was going to spend on Christmas presents for my family on a bottle of Talisker and a bottle of Lagavulin, which then accompanied me over the Christmas period instead. And at which point in time, that was me done for the wonderful world of whiskey. And so that was about, I still try and pinpoint exactly when it was, because I'm not even entirely certain if the story is true. It's a bunch of different memories jammed into one in my university days. And I'm fairly certain that would have been 97, 98, around there. And so over the past 24, 25 years, whiskey's been just this thing in the back of my brain. And it's always been there. I was writing a blog about whiskey and booze in general. And I got in contact with the Whiskey Exchange to try and get involved with some tastings they were doing. So I was already going and writing about them. One thing led to another. I'm not going into any detail there because me and my mate Tim, Tim Forbes, who used to work at the Whiskey Exchange, have very different memories of exactly how it all happened. But anyway, somehow I ended up with a job at the Whiskey Exchange, left behind my quite shockingly high-paying job in the city to become a poor writer. And have spent the last 10 and a half years writing, talking about booze, and occasionally drinking some of it.
What do you think of this Jura 18? Have you had it before?
Yeah, when they did the relaunch of the Jura range, I don't know what you thought of Jura in the ancient times, before times. I was never a particularly big fan, apart from the Jura 16, which I loved. Mm-hmm. I didn't like anything else. I loved Jura itself. I loved the island. I loved the people who worked there. I went up to visit years ago, back in the days when Alwyn Gwilt, who's now the Balvenie brand ambassador, when she was merely a whiskey blogger and occasional travel writer, back in the ancient times. And we went up there and hung out with the Willies and Richard Patterson and PR team we went up during the Isla Festival and didn't go anywhere near Isla for the entirety of the festival. In the end, Neil and Joel, Neil Ridley, Joel Harrison, picked me up out on Jura, drove me to Kalila, just so I could say I'd been to an Isla distillery, shoved it, took the bottle I bought out of my hands, dumped it in the boot of their car and said, you'll get this later. Now let's take it to the airport. But I loved Jura, but I never really loved the whiskey. There's a few distilleries which are like that. I love the people, I love the place, but I don't like the whiskey so much. But with this new launch, Greg Glass has become involved. This one, I think, is maybe Richard Patterson's finger is still definitely on this one. Red wine cut, Richard, seriously. But with Greg sort of like bringing some of his influence into it as well. And he's somebody who, back in his Compass Box days, I loved his whiskies. And with this new Jura range, I really like what he's done. I really like, my favourite one of all was the Sevenwood. It's a very silly whiskey when it comes to sort of like the name. And, everybody's sort of going, oh yeah, Auchentosha's got a free wood. There's a load of double wood. So Jura, okay, I see, really 7. I was sitting there going, oh, Richard, what have you done? So many wine casks, so little time. Looks at it and went, oh, there's no wine cask. Greg has just done a load of weird things with wood. Good work, Greg. But it's 18. It's good. I say they brought that sort of bit of peat in there as well. The wine casks don't overtake it. It tastes like decent whiskey. And from my original appearance, when me and the other people who went to write tasting notes at the Whiskey Exchange, when a box of all of the different new ones turned up, there was definitely a drawing of lots to see who wrote about it. It was not a popular assignment.
The next one we're going to be doing the Firkin 49, which hopefully I think you might have been exposed to a couple of these before, but
well, I was saying to earlier on, we're talking about the whiskies and seeing what we're going to taste. I've had a chat with the guys at Firkin, but I've never actually jumped into it because, and Nick, if you're out there and if you ever see this, I'm not dodging your phone calls. One of my former co-workers years ago, back in my early days at the Whiskey Exchange, now works on Firkin Whiskey. And he called me up and he told me all about it and it sounded really interesting. He sent me some samples and it's been absolute carnage ever since. So it looks like I'm dodging his phone calls. He's a man who loves phoning people rather than using emails, whereas I'm an email person because I never know where I'm going to be. And it's like I'm in the bathroom, or I've left my phone in the other room, or taking the bins out, or something like that. It's literally, I just keep on missing him. I've got Phone Nick on my notepad of things I need to do. So if you are watching it, I'm not dodging your phone calls. I will speak to you soon. But I haven't really heard very much about it. He said, we were going to have a proper sit down and a proper chat and so I can learn about what they're doing. I've seen them pop up every now and again, and I've heard some good things. So I'm intrigued to try this one because I've literally got another sample just sat here on my desk at the moment, which I've not got round to opening yet. I'm feeling slightly guilty about it. So,
well, that's airing out and you're mulling it over. I'll ask you about your kind of whiskey blogging. You've been blogging for like so many years now that in the time that I've been doing my thing, the whiskey industry has changed. So in the kind of like 10, 15 or so years that you've been involved in whiskey blogging, how do you think the industry has changed for your perspective? And do you think we've hit peak popularity yet? Have we still got a ways to go?
It's been a really interesting decade. I am 21 days as of recording from my 12th anniversary of starting writing specifically about booze. I've been blogging for coming on 20 years. Originally, I had a live journal so I could speak to my friends who had live journals. I still remember, I'm fairly, again, it's one of those lovely false memories. I'm fairly certain it's true, but it may not be. I remember being at university and reading a Newsnet post about someone talking about their weblog and how they would like to abbreviate weblog to blog because it sounded cooler. That sort of thing. So I've been playing around with this idea, and I'm a big proponent of people writing on the internet. There is such a low barrier to entry. I want everybody to write on the internet. I also want people to have elements of quality control about what they read. But that's a totally different thing, and I'm very pleased for people to write on the internet, but I do believe in that maybe the worst people should probably stop after nobody reads them. But anyway, get out there, write what you want to. It's up to you. But yeah, so one, I've seen that grow and grow and grow, at the same time as can contract. It's really weird. There was such a huge burst of people doing whiskey blogging and writing online. And now then there were people commenting and whole communities around the comments. And now there are not anywhere near as many whiskey blogs, I would say. There's a rise in this whole YouTube thing that I think you may have heard of. It's
just a little bit, yeah.
We have YouTubers, we have Instagrammers now. The long form writing has disappeared in the blog world, and the most popular blogs we have out there now are tasting notes, and there are a few of us who still try and write stuff which is not tasting notes. You may notice that I don't write anywhere near as much on my own blog anymore. It's almost like I've got a day job and a blog to occasionally write over there. I had a day job before, but it was writing code. It was a lot easier to write in the evening, but But people like Oliver Klimek used to write dramming.com. He would occasionally write a tasting note, but he'd write about whiskey. Steve Urey, who disappeared again years ago, he's still around in the background on Facebook. He used to write short posts, but they were short posts which were thought-provoking and didn't necessarily talk about flavour and tasting notes. Matt Mackay, who still does the Dramble, he is somebody who writes an essay followed by some tasting notes. And that's sort of my approach that I've always gone for as well. And that essay is always interesting, and that's what I've always tried to do as well, whether I wove notes into stories or whatever. And I still have this a variety of sort of like, online projects of stuff I want to do. And one of them is a website which is just no tasting notes ever. Writing about whiskey as a concept. That seems to have disappeared. The number of whiskey magazines, we're down to one in the UK. One I used to write for no longer exists. The one, there's another one I speak to a guy today about a magazine that might pop up in the future. He's trying to work out how to do it commercially. There's a little bit, that sort of thing going on still, but commentary has changed a lot. And that's my big thing. The thing I really notice is commentary has changed, but it's changed across everything. So from that side of things, from my blogging side, the industry itself, do you have several hours? Because I can tell you literally hours worth of things which have changed from the days when you used to be able to buy Port Ellen, and now Port Ellen is a thing which people sort of talk of in hushed tones, when Brora was the thing you should have been looking at all the time. The fact that I've got a bottle of Chichibu on the side in the other room, which I chose the bottling strength of at 48% for Chichibu Spirit of Osama. Tim Forbes chose 55%, obviously inferior to mine. Also, my label, nice blue, his chocolatey brown, and that's me being nice when I say chocolate brown. But yeah, those bottles, they were 50 quid bottles of Kurosawa that you could buy. We deliberately did them to be, I think, 45 and 55 originally, something like that, 50, 55, 50, 60 quid. They sell for, I sold one of mine for a few hundred years ago. I still have my 48%, which is my one, not Tim's rubbish one. And it's worth hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of pounds. And it was just a 40, 50 quid whiskey. And that is a thing which you've seen change, this escalation of these collectibles and things like that, when even for things that were just there just to be drunk so people could drink these things other people were charging loads of money for. But I think in general, if you ignore all the silly things that aren't there for drinking and just look at drinking whiskey in the industry, we've never really had it so good. There's such a range of stuff. All the people who complain, oh, it's all young and NAS. It's like, yes, but there's also all the other stuff that's still there for you. Oh, there's other stuff. People like that as well. It was different. Oh, how about that? All these new distilleries making these things which are young and youthful, but a totally different style. They're not the same as old things. Everything has just changed. It's again, if you go back, 10 years, 20 years before 2000, back to the 1980s, and then look at the changes then. There weren't quite so many vocal whiskey geeks back then. But yeah, you'll see exactly the same thing. The rise is just a constant change at all times. And we're just on our own little cusp and being old men looking back into the olden days and saying, I remember when this were Output Fields. And then everybody else who's remember those Output Fields days goes, no. There were even more fields in the past. It's just ongoing change. And it's yeah. But no, if you ever want to sit down, just have a chat about a list of the things that have changed in the past 10 years that I've been working in the industry and the 10 years I was drinking whiskey beforehand. Bloody hell, yeah. That's a long time. So, and this whiskey, it tastes nice. Yeah, simple as that, really. It's got, again, I was talking about those whiskeys, you've got a little bit more of a youthful style to them.
Yeah.
So this is a 2012 vintage. It was bottled last year, I think, maybe the year beforehand. So you're looking at 7-8 years old. It's got an Amontillado and a Oloroso maturation on it. Is that just the finish?
I've been avoiding saying full maturation because I don't know what happened before they wrapped this into their freshly built casks. Because I know some of these distilleries have got a habit of just getting their whiskey out into any old cask before they sell it on to the next person. So it might well have seen something else before it got into this, but it's, I would say, nearly full-term maturation in their specially created casks that they spend a lot.
I'm sure this is like a Franken cask of Oloroso
Yeah.
and Fino Stoves. Yeah, that fits with the sort of random mumblings I've heard about it. And it works. It's just a young sherry matured whiskey. The sherry hasn't overtaken it. It's still got, one of the things I always talk about, and the thing we talk about a lot at the Whiskey Exchange, is spirit character. And I always describe it as Stockholm Syndrome. I've been working with Sekinder for long enough now that what Sekinder says goes really with my taste in whiskey, because he's been feeding me enough whiskey over the years while I've been locked in the basement, that, you know, I've sort of come to sort of appreciate it. But that spirit character, be able to taste the distillery, is a big thing for me. You know, again, to jump ahead in the book, Mark Rainier, to randomly pull a name, of Waterford Whisky, formerly of Bruichladdich, is a man who I disagree with almost fundamentally on everything. However, I like the fact that he's around, and I also like a lot of stuff he does say. I may disagree with a lot of stuff, but one of the things he said was how people talk about, you know, how much flavour comes from a cask. And he said, the only number I will use when talking about that sort of thing is 100%. 100% of the whiskey is affected by the cask. I can't tell you how much flavour comes from the cask because that is going to be entirely variable and you can't come up with a number. But all of the whiskey is affected by the cask. And it's like, yes, everything in here has been hit by the cask. You can still taste the distillery underneath, lovely sort of nuttiness and all that sort of business, as well as having a nice little sherry jacket, but not too much. So, successful Firkin, people.
Well, on that note, then we just liked that whiskey. Shall we move on to the only not whiskey in the lineup?
Certainly, yes. So
here we have the Fireball.
it's a long time since I've experienced this joy. I have a dirty secret, and that is, and you may, if you've seen the blog posts on the Whiskey Exchange blog over the years about the JD and other flavoured whiskies, you may notice they're always written by me. It was the day that I told everybody I like JD Honey in the office. It was like, right, you're marked from now on. I quite like flavoured whiskies. These are not high class drinks. You know, I like McDonald's as well. You know, it doesn't mean that I don't like tasty burgers. McDonald's are produced by people who have done focus groups to ensure their burgers are tasty. Fireball is focus grouped to hell to make sure it tastes exactly what a frat party needs. You know, yeah, most of it is sold in these tiny little bottles to make sure you can grip it properly between your teeth when you go. Unfortunately, these days I'm not allowed to drink too many sugary things because, you know, being a fat man as I am, I need to be good. So some Coke Zero in the top of that, yeah, cinnamon Coke, that's what you want. So,
excellent. I wish I'd have done the same thing.
That should keep you awake for the rest of the evening, which is always good. So, chin chin.
Chin chin indeed.
It surprises me. It tastes like cinnamon, doesn't taste like whiskey. It's just a cinnamon liqueur, really. And it's fine.
So you're on top of everything that you do, you also do some judging of whiskey. I want to ask you what you think makes a good judge, and what do you look for in your drinks, and also what do you think the Fireball would? How do you think a Fireball would do if it got into kind of a judging category? It's a bit of a multi-layered question there.
Judging is a weird one because in order to be a judge, you have to be someone with strong opinions at the same time someone willing to change your opinion. And different judging panels, different competitions will be run differently. But I do a few, and the ones I generally do more than once are the ones where you don't sit entirely in isolation, write down a score, and then go home. Discussion is important, and having the right people in a panel is important. And I chair a lot of panels, and one of the things you try and do is not steer the group, but give everybody the opportunity to have their say, and everybody will have their own score in the end. You know, you play around with, and it's a whole thing of just leading a group to have a consensus opinion about a spirit. Because one of the things I always talk about as well is the concept of objectivity in judging, because people often say, "Oh, you can't be objective; it's all personal." It's like, yeah. However, this is my job. I have for many years spent a large amount of time trying to work out what other people will like, because that's the whole point. You know, there are many whiskies out there which are not my thing. Virgin oak in a whiskey, red wine casks virgin oak in a Scotch whiskey, red wine casks in general. People bloody love them. You know, peated red wine cask whiskey, I have yet to find one I like. A classic example for me is the English Whiskey Company do a peated red wine cask, which I think is vile. They do such fantastic whiskey down there. Their bourbon cask stuff, just plain bourbon cask whiskey, is the best young bourbon cask whiskey I've ever tried. One of the best young whiskies in general I've ever tried. And they do this. And I asked, why do you do this? Why do you have all this fantastic whiskey? And the answer was, because people bloody love this and they buy it. I was like, okay. So now when I do a competition, if I get a peated red wine cask, I'm not going to go, well, this is awful.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about only me. You have to be able to look out beyond that and look out to what the general public are going to like, and look at the quality of the whiskey in an objective fashion. And the WSET, the Wine and Spirits Educational Trust, who I do training with, they have what they call the SAT, the systematic approach to tasting, which is when you try and remove your personal preference as much as possible and do an analytical tasting. So you look for quality, you look for the quality of production, you look for depth of flavor, you look for balance, you look for that sort of thing. And level 3 spirits, which is the top level for spirits at the moment, you have to give a quality at the end of a tasting note. And then you then have to justify that quality, and you have to write an argument as to why it's good or bad. And so I've written arguments for things which I don't like, saying they're good. I've written arguments for things which I really do like, saying they're not all that great. Because the quality may not be great, but that's different to whether you like it or not. And so, as I said before, the average McDonald's burger is not going to tick the boxes for the highest quality burger, but I really like them. Brewdog's burgers are generally considered to be quite good. I won't eat them because they're not very good, in my opinion. I can pull it apart and tell you the quality elements of all the different bits and pieces, and I can point out the pieces I feel are lower quality and bring them down. But again, it's that idea of trying to dissect. It ruins you. It absolutely ruins you for enjoying things quite a lot of the time, which is the reason why I sit and drink whiskey in tumblers and try not to think about it. Because if you think about it, you start dissecting and start doing that. So Fireball is actually a decent one to talk about for this thing, because there's a few examples we use in WSET to try and explain this. So one, any vodka. Trying to rate a vodka as a quality of spirit, if you're a brown spirits drinker, it's very difficult. So a lot of people just go, oh, you can't give it a good score because it's rubbish. It doesn't taste of anything. It's like, yes, it's not meant to. You have to look at what the spirit is and what it's trying to achieve and all that sort of thing. Fireball, it says here liqueur blended with cinnamon and whiskey. So that just means that is vodka and sugar with cinnamon, and it's just rubbed homeopathically against a cask of whiskey to try and get some kind of connection there. But tasting it, it's quite thick. The cinnamon flavour is very artificial. It doesn't have that real fresh cinnamon flavour. There is no depth of flavour to it. There's no real whiskey flavour. It's just simple sugars and simple spice with nothing else going on. So I would say it's no off flavours. It doesn't have any badness to it. It doesn't have any bitterness. It doesn't have any sharp notes. It doesn't have any ridiculous burn or anything like that. So I'd probably put this as adequate in the WSET sort of thing. There's nothing which is going to tick it up to the next level. There's no depth or anything like that, but it's not bad. And this is the other thing to remember, and this is something that popped up recently. I posted something on Twitter after reading. The SWA finally revealed the price of the average bottle of whiskey that they talk about in Scotland. It was £15 is the average price of a bottle of whiskey in the SWA's minds. The minimum amount of money you can spend on a bottle of whiskey before you are only paying tax is about £11.50, 12 quid, around that sort of mark. That's the minimum, because that's the minimum amount of tax you can pay on a 70cl bottle of 40% whiskey. You've got like £3 to play with there. And from £15 up to whatever is everything else. So half, by the nature of an average, half of the whiskey is in that £3.50, £3 thing from £15 downwards, and everything else is above. Adequate, I would say Fireball is adequate. No more, no less.
That's absolutely a great way of doing it, and that's one of the many reasons why I wanted to get you on this show, because I hoped that you would give me an answer like that, because there's many different answers to this, and that's obviously you hate it. I haven't found anybody that that is like really happy about drinking the Fireball, like necessarily, but to assess something. This is something I try and do on my channel as well. Is to assess something for the person that does like it. Because very few, I think I've got 4 in my 300 and something reviews that I've classed as terrible, and 2 of them were old and probably corked, because they were like 1980s bottles or something like that, and they're just like, this can't be that bad. It wouldn't have been able to sell it if it was that bad. It must have just been ruined over the years. The only other one was that White Walker up here, which I keep on my shelf because I've got 200,000 views on that video, so it might be terrible, but it's everything to me.
I don't think it was anywhere near that bad. I drank my bottle quite happily. Bit of ice, quite nice. Yeah, but no, and again, it's that thing of occasionally you will get a thing where even if you're trying your hardest, as I've been doing judging pretty much since I started in the professionally in the whiskey world. So I hit 10 years back in May this year. So a decade of judging. I've been a decade of developing the concept of an objective palate, of a consumer palate. But every now and again, I still get something and go, nope, 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 not for me. And then somebody else goes, oh, that's great. Can I get a bottle of it? I go, oh, crap. Back to the drawing board again. You don't know as much as you think you know. And it's having that, I think the one which really, really did that to me badly was Scallywag by Douglas Lang. The first edition of Scallywag, I despised to such a level that I couldn't understand how anybody could like it. And then a mate of mine just tried it and went, oh, that's quite nice. I was like, bollocks. Start again. And then I looked at it, I asked what they liked about it, I drank it, I tried it again and went, okay, what do I not like about it? What are my hang-ups? I need to look beyond those and try and internalize them, see what other people like. Again, it's just another notch added into my big list of stuff I know about what other people like. Still not a fan of it, but I can see why people like it now. And actually, that style is a style I now understand a lot more and occasionally do drink out of choice, like that young, crunchy whiskey, as I call it. It's green and barley sugary and all that sort of business. And it is really, yeah. But no, having those things where trying to develop that objectivity at the same time as always being aware that you can't be truly objective all the time. It's a learned skill and, always need to keep working on it. And unfortunately, as ever with all of this, practicing means drinking more whiskey.
I mean, it's a shame, I know.
It's a hard life. It's a hard life we lead, as I often say, it seems.
Well, cheers to the fireball in that case then.
Chin chin.
How about we take the cinnamon taste out of our mouths with something extremely high in ABV. This one is my own one, the Aberfeldy 6-year-old, my second release.
Excellent. And again, so, just looking at it, you have a recharred hogshead, so you have a refill cask, but with a load more life in it. I haven't even opened yet, anything like that. Aberfeldy spirit is a decent sort of like nice weighty spirit. 6 years, should have rounded off some of the edges at the same time as still having a nice chunk of Aberfeldy in there. Decently active cask, should probably have rounded the edges a bit. And again, this sort of style of whiskey was almost unknown in the shops a decade ago. And initially it was released, people went, oh, you're just trying to make money. And then people started going, I actually quite like it as well. And it's that shift to people going, no, shut up, we quite like it. That's the bit which really has sort of opened up these new styles across everywhere.
I suppose I better ask you a question while we air it out. Obviously, whiskey is your main focus, and you've been into whiskey for a long time. But obviously, you write about a lot of other spirits and other drinks as well. I'm interested to think, if whiskey didn't exist, what do you think you would be primarily covering, if anything at all? Would you still be back doing your software stuff? Do you think you'd be covering a different drink?
If whiskey didn't exist, I suspect I would just be a software engineer like going down the pub. Whiskey really is the thing that opened my eyes to the fact that spirits were a thing I should look at. My dad, it's a very weird thing. My dad is a electronic engineer who worked with electronic engineering training and software. I was a software engineer who worked with training and software because it was the software I was writing from that. He does wine and also is a big cognac and armagnac fan. I do whiskey and sort of like some more beery things. We sort of meet in the middle on beer a bit as well, but I'm much more geeky than him on it. So we both sort of had these interests in that sort of thing, but he was always a big sort of cognac and armagnac fan. And I was going down the whiskey sort of route, never really got into cognac and armagnac. But yeah, it's I think whiskey is really the thing which opened my eyes to it all. Rum was something which I could have got into because I was a big rum fan at university. The two things I drank were Jameson and Coke and whatever dodgy rum I could find on the bar. Occasionally, Puss's Overproof, I was feeling fancy. But no, it's rum didn't have the exposure back then. These days, if I was at university now, I'd probably be a rum geek.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because there's now that opportunity to get interesting rums. But back then, back in late 90s when I was at university, a bottle of Puss's Overproof was really quite an impressive thing to find. So it's these days though I do a lot of, as you say, a lot of stuff outside. I got my job at the Whiskey Exchange after I was noticed after writing an article about tequila. I got an email from the guy who ran the tasting saying, did I really say all that? I was like, yes, I wrote down most of the stuff you said, but I also did my own research. It's like, oh, really? Thank you. Email to people at Whiskey Exchange saying, this guy just did this. You probably want to keep an eye on him. So for the moment, I do a lot of work with Japanese spirits, especially awamori, and a bit of shochu. And I'm very interested in baijiu, sort of Chinese spirits as well. And yeah, the awamori stuff, I actually do work with the Okinawa Distillers Association, who are the guys who look after all the distilleries in Okinawa who make awamori. Awamori is only made in Okinawa. I did some tastings recently with them and try my best to teach people about these weird spirits you just don't find over here, which you don't drink in the same way as you drink whiskey or other things, and which are very different at the same time as, in the case of awamori, occasionally strangely familiar in some of the flavors. But yeah, I cover absolutely everything. You know, just on my desk at the moment, I've got a lot of whiskey. I've got some cognac. I've got some Irish whiskey. I've got some new make spirit. Going around the corner, I've got some liqueurs. Next door, I've got a load of awamori. I also have these 3 samples here, which I don't actually know what they are, but a friend of mine in Hong Kong sent them to me, and I now have to try them and let her know what they are. And I was drinking beetroot liqueur, beetroot eau de vie on Sunday night. So, you know, it really is. I look outside of whiskey as much as possible. It's the thing I talk about most. It's the thing I know, which has basically just been embedded into my brain the most. But one of the reasons I have the job I do is the fact that I look outside. I mean, you know, for a company like the Whiskey Exchange, we may have whiskey in our name, but we sell everything.
Do you know what? Talking about that concept is great to assess my whiskey, because definitely 100% not the pinnacle of whiskies, but I picked these blind when I chose them, so they're really just whiskies that I like. So yeah, let me know what you think, and please do be honest about it.
I just put a couple of drops of water in it because on its own, it was a little bit intense, a little bit closed. And again, nothing off about it. It's just a bit hot and a little bit. The main thing is just the closed, but it's got a lovely nuttiness to it. Now you add a bit of water to it, it's a bit creamy. It's definitely youthful. You can taste that youth, but it's lost that edge of. It's very difficult to describe. I always talk about things like, you know, caraway jelly and this sort of edge of youthful herbiness, which sort of shows it's not quite had the edges rounded off enough. This has got a little bit of that left, but not very much. It's lost. It's become whiskey. There's a certain point where a new make spirit becomes whiskey rather than new make, and it takes a little while when it gets there. And I reckon potentially that if you, I don't know if you've bottled the whole lot, if there's anything left in there, but if you've bottled the whole lot, then it's not quite infanticide. You're all right still, but it's good. It's a nice whiskey of this style, but it's the sort of thing that would also develop. I'm not sure about the rechar cask, whether that would have helped it, whether you need to, in a refill, that probably after sort of 10, 15 years be fantastic. With a rechar cask, I think you get a lot of the oak character type thing, and it's had a lot of that transformative effect of just being in a cask as well, rounding off those edges. But it tastes like Aberfeldy. You know, I couldn't pick it out blind. That I will happily admit, because I don't know Aberfeldy anywhere near well enough. But knowing what it is, it fits perfectly into what I assume. It has some weight, it has some nuttiness, it has some creaminess in there. The cask giving it a nice vanilla edge. It's got some fruit building in there as well. It's a good dram, mate. You have chosen wisely.
How are you with peat? You know, I know you've been drinking a lot of whiskey and you go up and down. So where are you at this point with peat?
Peat at the moment, well, these days I don't really do so much of an up and downy. You know, I drink everything at all times pretty much. I enjoy. I can see, analyze whatever a little bit much, but peat, I like it in lots of different forms. You know, I like everything from really ancient peat where it's disappeared and you just have peat, not smoke. And I love, really, one of my favorite things is young Kalila, and even beyond that is Ardbeg New Make.
Well, let's get some Mira Svenska in the glass to breathe out. While I ask you about something not whiskey related. Actually, we touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about your Instagram love of coffee and things like that. But something I want to ask you about is what do you think the critical elements of sandwich building are? And what do you think your most successful creation to date is? Like, what was in that?
Well, this is the weird thing. I don't make sandwiches at the moment. I don't eat sandwiches. And the weirdest thing of the whole sandwich thing was, you know, during lockdown, I was eating lunch and I was seeing nobody, nobody's leaving the house. I live on my own. The most interaction I had was with the lady who lives downstairs, because pigeons were crapping on my balcony, and I was trying to clean it up and trying to organise with her, but I could brush my balcony without hitting her balcony. That's literally the most interaction I had with people outside of my work colleagues on Zoom and on Slack and things like that. And so I decided that I was going to change my life by upping my sandwich game, upping my lunch game in general, and that meant sandwiches. I don't particularly like bread, and so it's not a thing which I go gooey over as many people do. So I used to work in the US and used to have a sandwich every lunchtime. And if you've been to the US and you've seen a US sandwich, you know quite how ridiculous they can go. So it's right, okay, up my game 2 or 3 times a week. I'm going to make good sandwiches. And I've since I started doing this, I've now loads of people talked about sandwiches for some reason. And but no, the big thing, and this was something that Jon Stewart was saying in an interview with Stephen Colbert a little while back on the Daily Show, whatever, whichever one that Colbert presents these days. And he was saying it's the ratios are very important. And so for me, bread is a holder. It's a holder which tastes of stuff. So you need to make sure you have that, but you also need to make sure it's rugged enough, because if you're going to get yourself a slice of sun-blessed white, thin sliced white bread, that'll not hold up to any form of chili sauce, for instance. It will dissolve into a bright red mess and all over your hands, and you might as well just scoop sandwich filling into your face. I talk about how chips are merely a spoon that you can eat for ketchup, and that sort of thing. And bread and sort of crackers and things like that, they are scoops. And so bread for a sandwich is literally the thing that keeps your hands not covered in crap. Not literal crap, that would not be a good sandwich. So choose your bread. And I ended up using a lot of rolls. A Scotch roll, fantastic, simple white bread, tastes quite nice, not too complex, but a good background to put anything else in there. And then I try and make sure I always have veggies in there. There's 2 reasons behind this. 1, because veggies are nice. And 2, because I was posting on Instagram. And Dawn Davis, our head buyer at the Whisky Exchange, who I've mentioned before, tells me off if I eat anything that is not healthy. And so consequently, I can't tell her of most of the things I eat, or mention it, or allow her to find out about any of these things. So consequently, I had to post something vaguely sort of like as a sop to her on Instagram. So, if I'd posted, for instance, as I have done, a sausage, bacon and egg McMuffin homemade, I got a week of abuse after I posted that one. So I just want to make sure, just for the easy life, that I have something vaguely healthy in there. Also, I'm a largish gentleman who needs to look after himself a little bit better than he is. And then it's just choice of flavour combinations. I'm a big fan of having, rather than sort of deli meats and all that sort of thing, sliced ham and things like that, going out and cooking things. I think my most successful, I can't remember exactly, I had a ciabatta, so solid bread, need a sort of a fairly husky roll for this one, with I think it was like pork bulgogi style Korean marinated pork steak, which I then sliced up, which I dressed with a sort of Korean style slaw of some kind. I think it was a cabbage and carrot with maybe even sriracha spice, sort of like, I don't like putting too much mayonnaise in coleslaw, so a little bit of mayonnaise just for binding, and then a load of vinegar to sort of vinegar it out, and then add a load of sort of hot sauce in there with some lettuce and stuff for crunch, all on ciabatta. But I've done that with barbecue and stuff as well, sort of similar ideas. So it's, I need to make more sandwiches, don't I?
Do you know what? I mean, obviously, I prepared that question beforehand, and I was getting a bit juicy just looking through the Instagram feed. And now, I mean, I've had my dinner already, but I just that's made me so hungry, because I don't, nowhere near that sort of level. And I have been to the States and just randomly walked in. I was in Chicago, just walked down the street and found a sandwich shop, and I was just like, I don't know, give me the thing that's got like everything in it, and it was just incredible. What an incredible thing to put in your face. So yeah, the first peated whiskey, then the Svenska Rook. Have you had this one before? You tried this?
Not for a while. I have tried it. I think I've tried pretty much everything that I've done. Big fan. I've hung out with Angela Durazio a few times. We're both judges at a competition over in America, and she is an incredible person just to talk to and hang out with, because she is entirely mad in a beautifully fun and interesting way. I've got pictures of us visiting the St. George's Distillery over in Alameda, just off near Oakland. And it's just, me trying to take a photograph of the still, and her in a bright red jumpsuit going, and sort of flourishing beside every time I try and take a photograph, jumping in and photobombing everything. Yeah. But no, her whiskey as well really sort of shows off some of that more sort of crazy side of what she does. And they've got some more regular whiskies, but then they go weird and mad. They go properly weird and mad. And their UK team has been, I've seen them grow over the years and change, and they've got, I think, a suitably mad bunch working with it now as well. But the peat isn't too strong, and it all just comes together quite nicely.
Yeah, I really like this one. It's a shame that it comes in a half litre, but I don't mind that sort of thing. I know some people do, but I mean, I'll take it. It's my absolute favourite of their core range. Love it.
The peat comes through quite differently to a lot of Scotch whiskies as well. I always talk about minerality and sort of like stoniness and coal and things like that in a lot of whiskies. And this is a proper coal smoky whiskey for me, rather than that sort of like a earthy vegetal peat. And it's good for it. It's got creaminess. The standard sort of stock style is that creamier style, but creaminess and coal smoke really works quite nicely together.
Let's move on to the last one then, I guess, if you're ready to. I know we're moving pretty quickly, but
No. Skip along.
the last one is the Glasgow 1770 Peated, which is a PX finish.
This is a whiskey which, one, I want to try, and another whiskey which, by the label alone, is something I will dislike.
Okay.
It's a PX cask finish, I think, and generally I find PXs are over the top, especially if it's that sort of colour. That's something where they've really got a damp PX cask and they're trying to jack in loads of flavour. It's also virgin oak. Another thing which I generally hate in Scottish whiskies, because I just don't think it works with long maturation of the style you're going to use with Scottish whiskey. A short, powerful, punchy maturation you get in a hot climate like the US, that may work better. Not necessarily hot climate, but you know what I mean.
I get you.
But at the same time, I really want to like every whiskey I try. And looking at this and going, I really hope. Is there a hope? We shall see whether there is or not.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the beautiful thing about whiskey, right? Because I don't like PX. I don't like the sherry that's the PX sherry in itself. Generally speaking, but I've somehow found this kind of real affinity with peat and PX.
Peat and PX, when it works, again, it's one of those things. I hate all peat and PX apart from the ones I like, which we did one years ago for a whiskey show, which was Lefroy, a 20-year-old, which I think was a 6-year finish in PX. And we did another one a little while ago, which was a sister cask of that, which I think had something stupid like 10 years in PX on a 20-something-year-old. And they were stunning. The most recent one I couldn't get a bottle of before it sold out because it bounced off the website so quickly, despite being like 400 quid a bottle. The Lefroy, the 20-year-old one, was 200 quid a go. I managed to get one for my whiskey club and one for my special When I Am Old collection in the other room. And so, that will be opened on my 50th, I think, is the current plan. So it's down the line. Despite the bald head and the grey beard, I'm not as old as I look. So I've got a little bit to go yet. But it's when they work together. But again, when it comes to younger whiskey, it's a difficult balance. It gets such a strong flavour. And it's one of those things that often swamps distillate, which is often what you want in a young whiskey. So if it's good cask, that could be a good whiskey. If the distillate's good and it's not being swamped too much, and the nose actually smells quite nice, which is making me both happy and sad at the same time.
Well, I'll let you chew over it while we talk about your book a little bit. We're finally onto the book, which is over here, over my shoulder, over your shoulder, which is the Philosophy of Whisky.
And the important thing, this is the thing I always tell people, because, again, I'm somebody who's quite verbose, as you may have noticed, is the fact that it's only a wee book. It's only little. Yeah, it's an hour or so's read. It's a short book, but it's my book, and someone asked me to write a book, so I wasn't going to say no. So I'm quite proud of it. So,
well, I mean, I have a not let's say an advanced reading age. I like things that are very consumable. It definitely took me longer than an hour to read it, but it's really good. And like you said, very consumable. But I talked to you previously via email saying that I actually had a bit of trouble getting hold of it because long-winded story, but I tried to use a charity that they still haven't sent me. Actually, I had to order off of the Spaceman to get this in the end. And but the charity book is still going to come, and I'm going to give it to somebody else because I still want to support the charity. But I needed it for this. I needed to read it before I spoke to you. Um, yeah, I ended up using the guide. But yeah, very consumable, very consumable. Very easy to read from start to finish. Unlike some of the whiskey books that I have read in the past, which are all excellent, but some of them are, big wedges and quite difficult to read. But yeah, how did you find the writing process? Obviously, you've been a blogger for ages. You've been a writer for a long time, but it's a different experience writing something that's going to be in this format, right?
Yeah, it's a weird one because mates of mine who I've known for years in the whiskey world and things like that. A little while back, someone paid me and spent, "Wow, what's it like being a writer now?" It's like, I've been a writer for more than a decade. You have read my stuff. It's like, yeah, but you're a proper writer now. It's like, there we. Having a book puts you in a totally different mindset to, a lot of people, to somebody who just writes articles and things like that. This is a bit of a weird one because this is not a massively long book. I had 6 weeks to write it. It was a really fast turnaround. Fortunately, for some reason, last year I had, earlier on this year, I had lots of holiday to take. I can't imagine why that possibly could have been. So I used up a load of my holiday. It was a very weird time, so I was training a lot at work as well. So we do 1 week, I would do 3 days, 2 days in the office, and then 3 days of training. Well, 2 days virtual office and 3 days of training. The next week I would do 2 days off and 3 days of work, and 2 days off were writing days. And I did that for 6 weeks, going back and forth between these sort of things. And so I just wasn't around at work very much. And then it reappeared. It was almost like this very, very strange long holiday in which I sort of bashed out all these words. And the book itself is a bit strange because actually this is this book, The Philosophy of Beards, is the first book in the series. The British Library republished this. It's by Thomas S. Gowing, and it's actually a transcript of an essay from 1854 about how if a gentleman does not wear a beard, it's an obvious sign of moral failing. And it's absolutely hilarious. Reading it now, it's quite funny if you just read it from modern context. But if you look into it and you try and read it from the actual context of the time, it's really interesting and really quite amusing and funny. And the guy is obviously a good sort of advocate for the wearing of beards. But this was quite popular and sold significantly more than they thought it would. And so they then commissioned other topics. So we've had cheese and coffee and wine and gin and tattoos to go down the same beardy front, and now also whiskey. And so the whole point of it is to be, the Philosophy of Beers is a very specifically directed book, but the rest of them are all about a sort of introductory guide, but rather than a sort of like a baby's first guide to whiskey, as many of these sort of shorter books are, lovely as many of them are, it's meant to be a slightly more intellectual feeling book to it. It's meant to be a little bit more of an in-depth dig into certain aspects of it. And so I wrote an outline, and I was very heavy on the history of whiskey and about how whiskey is so embedded in culture and how we don't necessarily realize quite how embedded it is. And I saw the first preview line of the email from the publisher came back saying, "Billy, lovely outline. However, on the history side of things, preview ended, and it's like, they don't like it. I need to chop it down." Open up the email and says, "We'd like you to dig further into that aspect." And so I got to focus a lot more on the history and about how whiskey has traveled from country to country around the world and how all of this is very, very intertwined. It's very difficult to tell a single timeline story, so I've broken it up into different timelines, and so you can see how those aspects interact, as well as all the traditional things you get in a whiskey book of here's some cocktails and all that, but also a load of stuff about how to drink it in as unpretentious a way as I possibly could, because I'm quite unpretentious in the way I talk about whiskey and how I treat whiskey. I can treat it reverentially if I need to. I have whiskies which they should be treated with reverence. There's a reason to. But most whiskey should be just treated as an ingredient that tastes nice. Stick it in your face on its own, or maybe do stuff to it if you want to use it as an ingredient to make other stuff taste nicer. And so understanding that, but also if you are going to try and extract the most out of a glass of whiskey, how to do that. So the book itself, travels on the same idea as all the other ones in the series, trying to pull apart the history and how we get to these things being so important to so many people. And it was the process of writing itself was quite fun. The process of cutting it down was less fun. I wrote, by the time I was about halfway through the book, I've written 1.5 times my word count. So I do have a social history of Ireland somewhere in a Word document, which is about 3 times as long as my chapter in the book. But I looked at it and went, one, this is very boring. I am not a historian. Well, I'm not a historian, sort of like writer for the general populace. And two, a lot of this is not about whiskey. I do not need to talk quite so much about Henry VIII's influence in Ireland at the beginning of his reign. Okay, chop, 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 chop. But no, it's one where I lent heavily on the books which people I know have written. There's a bibliography in the back, which is basically half a thanks and half a you need to read this. They're the people who really sort of taught me the stuff that I know, both from their books and from speaking to them. And it really is something where I've just tried to condense the information that I found elsewhere into a form where, as you say, it's very consumable. Because I don't think there's a couple of books which almost do it, but I don't think there's any books which have done this sort of like, breakdown into a form that's so easily digestible as an idea of where to start from. And all the way through this, and the reason why I have that bibliography at the back is, here is the basic information you need to know to understand how all this works. Now, please use that to understand that you don't know anything. Now go and learn more things. Or use that as the jumping off point to fill in some gaps and go, oh, I now see more gaps from what you said. Because that's the way that I look at all education is, as you learn the things you don't know. And you learn that there is more for you to learn. And that's the important thing. And I hope this book, in a strange way, teaches you enough to realize you don't know anything, which is a strange thing, I think, as an objective. But yeah.
Yeah, I think. Actually, it's this. This sounds like I didn't read it, but one of my favorite things in it is in the first chapter, because when I'm talking to people about whiskey that don't know about whiskey, I often say things like, it's they make it from a beer that's really quite disgusting. If you ever get to try it, and that's usually what I say. I never really thought about it anymore. But I really love when you were talking about it's like a bad porridge that you make a bad beer out of, and then a bad vodka, and then at some point it gets good in a cask, and then you bottle it. And that really, for me, that had a concept that was kind of like messing around in my head somewhere, and gave it a bit of a direction. I was like, actually, I didn't even think about it like that, and it's so true. That it, like, really what we're drinking in the glass now is obviously designed, but originally when it first got to this point, it was all mistakes after mistakes after mistakes, and then they're like, oh, actually, we don't want to waste any of this, but now it's turned out to be all right.
And whiskey was a byproduct. For years and years, it was a way of using up leftover stuff, leftover grain, the casks even. We don't use, in Scotland, they don't use first down casks. They use the casks which are left over after they imported sherry. This is a product which started from being a leftovers. And it's one of the things I say in the book, I think in the American side of things, it's like this started off in the New World being what you did with your leftover crops, but very quickly became a thing you could trade in general, if you make good stuff. And that's what whiskey's always been. It's tied, though, into the very fabric of a lot of things. I think I make some very, very grandiose claims in the first chapter, very deliberately over the first paragraph. I think originally said whiskey is life in there at one point. That went quite early in the editing process. But again, it is one of those things where if you look at whiskey's developments, you can see how it ties into the development of the human race. You can do this with lots of other different things as well, but you can see agricultural development, you can see scientific development in distillation and things. You can see analytical development as people learn how to analyze stuff. You can see social development at the moment in the way that there are movements within the whiskey world to try and push against sort of gender norms and things like that for drinks. The concept of gendering drinks is something that's always upset me. There's no, the whole thing of sort of like, Al Murray's deliberate piss take of a glass of white wine for the lady, that sort of thing. Again, that was taking the piss out of that, but at the same time, a large amount of the audience didn't necessarily realize it was taking the piss. But there's a whole chunk of that which is now being pushed against by the whiskey world. There's an acceptance of this is what this is like, which people in the whiskey world are pushing against and saying, no, it's not like that in production and flavor. And even this whiskey, this is probably a 3-year-old, probably a couple of days over 3 years old, whatever, maybe 4, which is peated and has been in a PX cask, and which I should hate and which I don't. and I slightly hate myself for it.
Well, actually, I was just going to ask you how this is doing for you because I mean I love it, but that's not why I picked it for this lineup. I picked it because it's a good, reasonably priced, not heavily peated, well peated whiskey that I thought would match into this lineup.
This is poking towards those heavily sherry lechigs of the of about sort of wherever it is now, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. Those whiskies which really showed people that you shouldn't dismiss young, smoky, sherried whiskies if you could find them. And also, Lechig was not just a distillery which made things that tasted of burnt rubber. I still have some of those bottles in my cupboard. I love the taste of burnt rubber. Anyway, reminds me of being kicked in the face as a child in PE classes. But that is. Oh, why do I like that? I don't liking that. It's very upsetting. I might have to buy some now. No, and again, it's that expectation. The thing which I always try and dispel from my brain when I try and go in fresh. Don't have any ideas, but look at this going. New Glasgow distillery. Oh, this is stunt whiskey. This smoky and PX. Stunt whiskey, just jacking up a cask. That's all this is, and it is, and it works. Well done, then.
Well, I'm glad I did that to you, even though we were being very nice about your book, and I've done this to you. But
oh no. Again, one of the things that I think it sort of says in the book is that age is not the be all. The cask is not all of it. The spirit is not all of it. It's the balance of all of these things. And if you bring these things together in such a way that they all work, that's what it's all about. And this, at the same time, this is not a whiskey that I'm going to run down the street throwing at people going, you must try this, it's the best thing ever, which I almost did with some of those older chicks. This is a good dram which shows these people know what they're doing, at least in this whiskey. So we'll see about the rest and see as they grow and as they change. Maybe they accidentally threw the things in the right bucket. We don't know. But what they've done here, they've done something which I think is good.
Well, that brings us to the end. So I'll say cheers to you now, and we can have a quick sip of this together. And of course, we've talked about your book a reasonable length, but book aside, have you got anything else you want to add to the end of the show? Anything else you're working on? What's the future? Are you going to go back to podcasting? We've all been waiting for that 2015 revival.
Unfortunately, Mr. Jason B. Stanley, my podcasting buddy, is I would say busier than I, but I think just more disorganized than me, and I'm even more disorganized than most people. We have yet to try and get together. There's actually a podcast in the can waiting to be edited, but it was after Jason had just come back from the whiskey show back in like 2015, 2016. And he really enjoyed himself. And he's a man who's quite effusive in his praise. And I was one of the people who helped run it. And so I sat on a podcast going, yeah, that's very nice. Thank you. For an hour and a half as he said things he liked about his weekend. And it was just like, I'm afraid, Jason, I can't put that podcast out because it is actually the most embarrassingly ego-stroking thing I've ever seen in my life, ever heard in my life. But no, at the moment, it's busy. Well, this is the problem. It's Christmas. And so in the wonderful retail world, we launched Christmas yesterday as of recording, and we've got loads of stuff coming up. I've got a stack of tastings coming up over the next month. I've got a load of Japanese spirit stuff I'm working on as well to try and organise some things in the new year within the industry rather than with consumers. The Japanese distillers really want to meet the Scotch whisky distillers and have a chat with them about things they could do as crossovers. And so there's lots of great stuff I'm going to try and achieve there. I'm doing a lot of training, both internally and hopefully more external stuff as we go along as well. It's just loads of little bits and pieces happening in the background. But at the moment, currently, I don't get any holiday or any particular weekends off or anything really until about the 22nd of December. So it's the joys of the push. At least I don't have to go and pick anymore. I used to have to go pick and help pack during the Christmas rush. But the big thing at the moment is my lovely book, as you have mentioned, is available in all of the places you can get books. It will be available on my own website, philosophyofwhisky.com, as soon as I get some more. I ordered a load for pre-order, and I sold all of them. Then I ordered some more, and I sold all of those in 4 hours, which was slightly annoying. So I was hoping they'd last me for a few weeks. And then, I've just put in a rather large order, which I'm hoping will last me through the end of the year. I will be at the Kendal Whisky Festival I think it's the first weekend of December. I'll be signing books and doing a tasting with Phil, the boss man there. And yeah, generally, you'll see me on the internet. I'll be here, there, and everywhere, as I usually am, running Tasting the Whiskey Exchange, talking rubbish on the internet, telling people they're wrong on the internet, which is, of course, my hobby, it seems. But other than that, yeah, no, nothing particular and specific. It's just the joys of coming out at the end of 2 years of strangeness, where I seem to have become somebody who lives online even more than I did beforehand. It's just seeing where that goes now. So, yes, lots of cool things behind the scenes that may happen one day soon. We shall see. We shall see.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks very much for giving up some of your evening to your very busy time to come and chat to us. Hopefully, you've enjoyed your time through these drams today. A couple of little surprises, but very grateful for you to coming along. It's been excellent to chat to you, and hopefully, we'll do this in person at some point soon. So, again, I'll say cheers to you. Thanks very
Cheers.
much.
Did you?